Open-top motoring. It's a pastime as old as the car itself. But with the advent of the fixed-roof automobile, it's since been relegated to a shrinking market of mostly half-baked convertible-topped afterthoughts. The BMW Z3, however, sought to relive the mid-century heyday of dedicated roadster sporting. Serving as an homage to the illustrious BMW 507, the Z3's design revived the iconic proportions of the classic European roadster. With a hood that stretches for a quarter mile and a seating position that might as well be in the trunk, its sweeping shape stole the show when James Bond himself debuted the car in 1995. A car fit for Bond, yet priced for Joe. It's no wonder the Z3 sold out the year it premiered. With a base price just shy of $30,000, even the most frugal hairdresser could swing the bill. Are hairdresser convertible jokes still relevant? Well, anyway, today, over a quarter century later, one question remains. Has the Z3 held up as well as the Bond film from which it starred? Or are its glory days long past, like Pierce Brosnan's career? Let's find out. What makes a car sexy? Well, if Freudian psychology is to be believed, it could be the curvaceous, wide hips that remind you of your fertile mother. Or perhaps it's the long, phallic hood reminiscent of your father. Well, whichever it may be, one thing's for sure. Freud was a total pervert. The other thing we know for sure is that green over tan is the most sophisticated and elite color pairing there is. And I will fight you in the comments if you disagree. This Z3 in particular is cloaked in a factory shade named Boston Green. Overall, the paint appears to be in great condition at first glance. I'd like to say that it's completely original, but admittedly, the car was resprayed in 2015 under previous ownership. I'd also like to say that the respray is perfect and that the exterior of this car is immaculate. But I'd be lying, and I'd never lie to you. I mean, if I were a liar, I'd tell you that whoever painted the car was very careful to not get overspray on anything, and that they didn't leave sanding marks under the newly painted surface. Or maybe I'd draw your attention away from the front of the car because, well, there's nothing noteworthy to see there. Hey, I said there's nothing to see. Well, since I'm being honest, there's a few other things I should mention. For one, the driver's side fog light is busted. The entire assembly needs to be replaced. Oh, and I may or may not have used nail polish to repaint some of the badges that were flaking away and faded. But in my defense, I got nothing. I'm just being cheap. I'll replace them eventually, I promise. The only other notable flaws pertain to the convertible top. It's stained in one spot and the plastic rear window is considerably scratched and faded, which is a very common issue as these cars age. All in all though, the condition of the exterior is just right for a daily driver. If it were any nicer, I'd be afraid to drive it and risk ruining it. Thankfully, the previous owners pre-ruined it. I just got to inherit all of its beauty marks. Yeah, beauty marks. Let's go with that. Car interiors from the 90s are often praised for their use of high-quality materials and lasting build quality. I'm sorry. I could not say that with a straight face. Let's face the facts. What we have here is a 25-year-old, mass-produced German parts-bin sports car that was built in the United States. While money was spent fine-tuning the drivetrain and chassis, evidently, money was saved on the interior. Perhaps not an issue when new, but these cost-cutting measures are now front and center for buyers today. One of the first common issues that I fixed was the loose and rocking seats. Over time, the thin plastic bushings within the seat rails wear down and create slop in the sliding mechanism. So every time you come to a stop, the seat abruptly slides forward about a half an inch. It really adds to the excitement of a spirited drive on a canyon road. Another common issue this car came with was the notorious saggy glove box. And no, saggy glove box is not the name of some heinous sexual act, but rather it's another byproduct of stingy German accountants. You see, the glove box latch is fastened to, once again, a thin, plastic mounting assembly which can't so much as carry the weight of the gloves you might place inside said box. So over time, the box deforms and looks like this. Some sheet metal scrap to reinforce the latch easily fix the issue. Next, we'll gloss over the various tears in the leather which have been glued to prevent further damage, and focus on the numerous other storage options which are broken, such as the cassette holder lid, this vertical storage box, and of course the upper rear storage box. The culprit of all these failures is of course brittle, cracked plastic. Cracked plastic as far as the eye can see. There's more cracks in here than a plumber convention. Yeah, you like that, huh? Well, how about this one? The plastic is so fragile, it might as well be made of Kanye West's ego. Oh, hey, I'm walking here, hey. Yeah, the plastic is so easy to break, it's like taking a and f***ing your in a f***ing while you're
This guy sucks!
Next segment. $108,000 miles may not seem like an impressive figure for most modern commuter cars, but for a German sports car, this six-figure milestone is something worth celebrating. Many sports cars, German, Japanese, or otherwise from the late 1900s, have experienced hard lives of countless, reckless owners who treated them worse than a rental car on spring break. But luckily for this Bavarian cream puff, it's led a simple life, only being passed down to 3 different owners, me being the third owner. The man I purchased it from had owned the car since 1999, before selling it to me after 22 years of gentle, maintenance-committed ownership. Although I didn't receive any service records with the purchase, the previous owner had told me that the car was maintained by a BMW specialist as long as he had had it. Routine scheduled maintenance visits were really the only reason for it being in the shop over the years. Perhaps it was bad timing, or maybe a few white lies were sprinkled into the sales pitch, but upon taking ownership of the vehicle, I had to address a few things almost immediately. Within a month of purchasing the car, I noticed a distinct lack of power in the upper rev range one day when making a brisk entrance onto the highway. This was a new behavior that developed pretty suddenly. A check engine light inevitably followed, and it pointed toward a lazy O2 sensor. Not a big deal, until it was. You see, O2 sensors generally have a lifespan of 7 to 10 years or 80 to 100,000 miles, which this car has long exceeded. And when a car is receiving inaccurate readings from these sensors, it prevents the vehicle from operating efficiently, oftentimes affecting the fuel-to-air mixture, amongst other things. This in turn can cause carbon buildup and premature wear within the powertrain. In my case, the catalytic converter fell victim to these effects and needed to be replaced. So take this as a PSA to replace your O2 sensors, kids. With that sorted, power was restored to the plucky 2.8 liter, and I was free to enjoy the car for a long time to come. Until I wasn't. See, there was nothing else wrong with the car, but I had this nagging voice in my head to overhaul the cooling system. And by nagging voice, I mean everyone on any BMW forum. Unfortunately, these cooling systems are somewhat of an Achilles heel to an otherwise robust power plant. The problems lie with the fact that it's made of mostly, you guessed it, brittle plastic, and all of it is just primed to explode at any given moment. Just waiting for that 110-degree Arizona summer day. So I got the jump on it. New radiator, hoses, water pump, thermostat, and housing. And for good measure, I removed the deadly spinning blade of explosive doom that is the mechanical fan. Those like to explode too. In its place is an electric fan setup fit for the modern-day automobile. So finally, with that all taken care of, I can now enjoy the car worry-free. Until I can't. Can we just ignore the 2 sunken spot welds for the rear subframe? Yeah, I'm just gonna pretend like I didn't see that. Thanks for watching. and I'll see you at the next mile.